Hello, and welcome to another episode of Unity Quickie. In this video, we will set up a simple scene which we would use for the tutorial series. If you have yet to download the project assets, do get it from the repository linked in the article. We will be using these assets for the tutorial. I have also added a link in the description of this video. And if you have been following the previous videos in this tutorial, you will already have some assets imported into your project view. Do keep them there. I'm just going through the motions again for those of you who have not watched the previous episodes. Now it's very straightforward to import anything into Unity. Just drag and drop. Now, before we proceed, let's do a bit of housekeeping. It helps to have a tidy project view, especially when your project grows in complexity. So as we can see, Unity created a materials folder automatically when we imported the model to hold the materials that come with the model. So that's the materials folder sorted for us. All we need to do is to add a models folder where we store our models. Now let's import our trees. Do note that I imported the tree into the asset folder rather than the materials folder because Unity automatically creates a new folder for materials if there isn't one in the current directory. So this is just to keep things tidy. And as you can see, this is the material that is sort of the default material for the tree. Now that we have our assets ready to go, let's start building our scene. The first thing we need to do is to add a ground object because we're not really creating a space game here, so we would like a ground object. We will use a cube ground object, a cube game object as our ground. As per previous videos, you can change the gizmo to manipulate the object using the buttons up here. So we are going to scale this cube to make it look like a ground. And move it back a bit. I think it's better for the camera. Ooh. There we go. Now let's rename it first. Ground. And let's give our ground some color. 3D models that are created inside of Unity do not come with their own material, so we will have to create a material for it. Let's change the albedo to change the color. I've always imagined the setting to be a sort of grassland setting, so let's go for that. This looks good. And drag and drop. Voila! Now we shall add some trees to the rather empty scene here. Go to your models folder, drag and drop a tree. There. Now I've specifically created the tree model without its own material, so we could add materials to it on Unity. Do note that the material here is created by Unity upon import as a placeholder material, because without any material, the tree would just not appear in the scene, or it'd be some purplish hue on the scene, which is not useful. So we can safely ignore this material for now. Now the tree is made of two different parts, the leaf mesh, two different meshes, the leaf mesh and the trunk mesh. This is so that we could add a different material to each mesh. So let's begin with the trunk. First, we'll create a new material. Trunk. Let's make the trunk bit more fiery. No. Alright, I think this makes an alright trunk color. Let's try it. There. And now let's give the leaves a shade of green. Let's make it a bit darker so it stands out from the ground. Oops. Hey, maybe a little darker. Yeah, this looks alright. Now that we have prepared the tree model, there is another important concept in Unity to get acquainted with. Imagine if you want to create multiple copies of this tree in the scene. It would be rather inconvenient to repeatedly drag and drop the tree model and to, set up the materials again. Unity has an asset type called Prefabs. Prefabs are essentially a template for objects that are reused. Let's try creating a prefab and see how it works. You can create a prefab by dragging a game object from the hierarchy view into the project view. So we want not this tree, but this tree that already has materials. Drag and drop it here. And voila! It creates something called tree.prefab. Now if you drag this prefab into the scene, it will be the colored tree, which is really useful. So you see, prefabs are great for objects that you want to have multiple copies of in a scene. And more importantly, when you edit a prefab object, you can propagate the change to all copies of that prefab in the scene. Let me demonstrate how it works. Well, let's say if I want to change the color of the leaves. So I'm not happy with this color. I go to materials, I create a new color. Let's say autumn leaves. Now, the color should autumn look like. Yeah. Maybe a little bit more red. Right, I think this should do. So drag and drop into this tree. As you can see, the change haven't been propagated to all copies of the prefab yet. You can choose to do it or not. So if you want to propagate the change, all you need to do is to click on this one. And because this tree is a prefab, you can find a prefab option here. And all I need to do is click apply, and voila! You see all the trees, they now have a new material on their leaves. There you go, see? And do notice that the tree that was created from a new model does not have the change. We can actually delete this right now, we don't need it anymore. Alright, let's replace it with a prefab. Oh yeah, the change will be propagated into obviously your original prefab copy as well. So prefabs are very important, especially if your game objects are complex, like it has a couple of components. Right now it seems easy because we're just playing with the material, but as we create objects with a slew of components, we really do not want to recreate the whole object every time we copy it. So that's prefab for you. Now, all we need to do is drop our hero, where's our hero, Alice, into the scene. We want her to face front, so 180. There we go. There. Alright, as per previous tutorials, we will be using a texture for our playable character Alice. So let's create a folder to hold the textures that we will be importing. And to add texture, it's pretty easy. All you need to do is to go to the mesh. Do note that when you import an object with materials, there will be assigned their materials by default. So you do not need to assign materials to them again. You can also change the parameters of the material here. And remember, we're dealing with Alice the mesh, not the parent object. So click on Alice's mesh, go to the parameters for Alice's material, and drag and drop her texture into the box right here beside the albedo, and voila! Alice has color now. You must have noticed that her sword is still uncolored. So to access a sword, we just double click on the sword, and now we have the sword's mesh selected. Once again, drag and drop, and now I believe we should have a fully colored scene. That's great. Now once you have done that, now we are ready to go to the next part to the tutorial, where we would be writing some basic scripts and adding components to our game objects to turn this static scene into a game. But before you go, don't forget to save the scene. So we'll call it main scene. So yeah, now when you load Unity up again, you can find this whole scene here. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next part of this tutorial.